So, I mean, one of the questions I'm trying to push towards is how committed you are to revelation. Because if you're a panpsychist, then revelation can't be the full story, since the conscious experience has to be broken down or broken up, some either way, depending on your version of big as smallism or cosmoism or whatever. But its real nature is these other things, the quiddities.
No, well, I'd say they're the things that ground my conscious experience. So if you're a bottom up panpsychist, it's the particle, or my consciousness is grounded in facts about particles, and then the particles are conscious. So those facts about micro particles ground facts about my experience, right? But it doesn't follow that that they're part of their essential nature, because I mean things can be multiply realized. So it could be that the heart, you can know what a heart is essentially without knowing its underlying what grounds it. So
right, but why is that move allowed for the panpsychist but not for the identity theorist? Like, because it's similar to kind of move I was trying to make earlier that you were objecting to, and now you're appealing to the exact same move. So I just wonder why is that legitimate in this instance?
It's whether you're talking about identity or grounding. So if you're talking about identity, it's just one and the same property. So the essence of X and the essence of Y must be the same. They're just the same property. But if you're talking about grounding, you could have the high level property and the low level property. They could be distinct. They could have different essences. I mean, it's not I'm saying there's no problems in this area. I'm sympathetic with a lot of the grounding literature that there must be some kind of constitutive connection and that the higher level stuff must kind of play a role. But I don't think,
So that's interesting. Then you wouldn't object to a grounding version of physicalism, which I take it a lot of non-reductive physicalists, that's what they want, right? That what they're claiming is that the consciousness is grounded in the physical, and then revelation doesn't get at that view.
I think there wouldn't be a priori entailment for one thing in the physical case. So I don't think purely quantitative stuff can entail qualitative stuff. So there wouldn't be an a priori entailment, but it could be that there's an a priori entailment in the panpsychist case from micro level qualitative stuff to macro level qualitative stuff. It's hard to make sense of that entailment, hence the combination problem. But there doesn't seem to me that the problems there seem to be more tractable. There doesn't seem to be a sort of in principle problem like there is, I think, in the case of physicalism and making sense of the a priori entailment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. I wonder if that's more of a theoretical bias than a datum, because it seems to me they're just as intractable. I mean, the fact that you start with something experiential, which I guess is supposed to alleviate the intractability, doesn't seem to me to get you much foothold in the problem. So I know your view about this. I mean, I think I know it anyway. Your view is that maybe it's spatial relationships that are the thing that we don't know about, and their fundamental nature is something that is inscrutable to us, or some word of that nature that we don't know it. And if we did know that nature, then we would be able to do these a priori entailments. That's that right?
That's one view of explored. So yeah, so I don't agree. Like Galen Strawson thinks you just can't possibly get consciousness from non-consciousness. I don't agree with that. I think there are pretty good arguments, and that's what we've been talking about most of the time, that you couldn't get an a priori entailment from just purely quantitative stuff. I don't think there are comparable arguments that you couldn't go from micro experiential to macro experiential. It's especially because there could be stuff we don't know about, which is, how could you rule out that there's, there could be stuff we don't know about. I mean, another thing actually that I'm more and more sympathetic to is the possibility of some kind of emergentist form of Russellian monism. So it could be there's just genuine layers in the brain, and there's a causal relationship. I'm more and more thinking that nothing we know from neuroscience rules that out. And then you might say, well, why not just be a dualist? But I sort of think still, different ways of understanding causal closure. I sort of still think dualism is empirically implausible. If there was something outside of the brain impacting on it on a really regular basis, that would really show up. But if there were levels in the brain, if do we really know from neuroscience that, the cerebellum, this incredibly complicated thing, is completely determined by the causal properties of its particles? Do we really know that? So it's not obvious to me that there aren't layers in the brain. So you could be a kind of Russellian monist where you've got, my consciousness is the intrinsic nature of macro level bits of the brain, and then there's the consciousness of the micro level bits of the brain, and there's a causal relationship. So that would avoid this problem altogether. That's one. So I'm open to both that kind of reductive and non-reductive approach. But even in the reductive case, I think that the problems that don't seem that the in-principle arguments that you get it. And also, we've just spent less time on it, right?
No, I think that's a good point. Yeah.
We could do both. Let's do both.
In defense of that, though, panpsychism is not a new view. I mean, it's interesting to look back at the history of psychology and how many of the early founders actually had panpsychist views. Right. Not to mention William James, but there's a whole host of the early members of the alleged science of consciousness, which psychology began as, who end up with something, and even physiologists, and so it's interesting. This view's been explored for a while, maybe not, but I take your point. Ultimately, not as long as some of these other views have been, like about 400 years of mathematically based science or something like that, and certainly nothing like that serious has gone on. So I mean, can I want to ask, there's tons of stuff I want to ask. We're running out of time. I can't keep you here